My avoidant parents always chose my brother over me. It wasn't until I was able to escape and finally live my own life that they missed me and wanted to be a happy family again. I decided to maintain my distance as I had much healthier relationships with my new partner and friends. Growing up, I often felt like a ghost in my own home. My parents, both emotionally avoidant, seemed to have an unspoken agreement. My brother Logan was the golden child, and I was merely an afterthought. It wasn't that they were overtly cruel. They simply had a way of ignoring my existence, as if I were a shadow lurking in the corners of their lives. From a young age, Logan was the star of the show. He excelled in sports, was charmingly witty, and had an effortless ability to make friends. My parents would beam with pride at his achievements, while I sat quietly at the dinner table, feeling invisible. I remember one particular incident that encapsulated this dynamic. It was Logan's birthday, and the house was filled with balloons and laughter. I had planned a small surprise for him, a scrapbook of our childhood memories. But when I presented it, my parents barely glanced at it before redirecting their attention back to Logan's gifts. In that moment, I learned that my efforts were insignificant compared to his. As the years passed, I learned to navigate my parents' affection by remaining in the background, always supporting Logan, always stepping aside. I became the dutiful daughter, the one who didn't rock the boat. I excelled academically, but it was never enough to earn their attention or praise. I often found solace in my friends, who became my chosen family. They celebrated my accomplishments and listened to my thoughts, things I could never share with my parents. The turning point came when I was accepted into a university out of state. It was my chance to escape the suffocating atmosphere of my childhood home. I packed my bags with a mix of excitement and trepidation, feeling the weight of my decision. For the first time, I was choosing myself. I remember the last dinner I had with my family before leaving. Logan was the center of attention, regaling us with stories about his latest sports achievements. I sat there, feeling the familiar pang of insignificance, but this time, I felt a flicker of resolve. I was leaving, and I wouldn't look back. University was a breath of fresh air. I met people who valued me for who I was, not just as an extension of someone else. I found a partner, Mia, who saw me. She encouraged me to share my thoughts and feelings, and for the first time, I felt validated. My friends and Mia became my support system, and I reveled in the freedom of being my true self. I began to explore my passions, from writing to painting, and each new experience filled the void that had long been created by my family's neglect. As the months turned into years, I thrived. I graduated with honors, landed a job I loved, and built a life filled with joy and meaningful connections. But with success came a sense of guilt. I often thought of my parents and Logan, wondering if they missed me, if they even thought about me at all. I had built a wall around my heart, protecting myself from the pain of rejection, but there was a part of me that longed for their approval. Then one day, I received a message from my mother. It was simple, yet it sent my heart racing. "We miss you. Can we talk?" The words felt heavy, laden with years of unspoken emotions. I hesitated, torn between the desire to reconnect and the fear of falling back into the same patterns of neglect. After a long night of contemplation, I decided to give them a chance. After all, people can change, right? We arranged to meet at a cafe halfway between my city and theirs. As I walked into the cafe, my heart raced. My parents looked older, wearier, and I could see the lines of regret etched on their faces. Logan was with them, and he looked just as I remembered, confident and charming. But this time, I wasn't just a spectator. I was here to reclaim my narrative. The conversation started awkwardly, with my parents expressing how much they missed me. They spoke of their regrets, acknowledging how they had taken me for granted. I listened, feeling a mix of emotions. They seemed sincere, but I couldn't shake the feeling that their newfound interest was more about their loneliness than about me. Logan, on the other hand, seemed unchanged. He spoke about his achievements and how he had always been the one to bring the family together. I felt a pang of resentment. Did he even realize how much his presence overshadowed mine? I decided to speak up. I shared my journey, my struggles with feeling invisible, and how I had found happiness outside of their world. It was liberating, but I could see the discomfort in their eyes. After the meeting, I walked away feeling conflicted. My parents had expressed a desire to be a family again, but I was no longer the same person who craved their approval. I had built a life filled with love and acceptance, and I didn't want to jeopardize that. I realized that while they might have changed, I wasn't ready to dive back into the dynamics that had once suffocated me. In the months that followed, I maintained a polite distance. I would respond to their messages and occasionally visit, but I was always careful to keep my boundaries intact. I didn't want to fall back into the role of the invisible daughter. Instead, I focused on nurturing the relationships that truly mattered, my friends and Mia, who celebrated my successes and supported me through my challenges. Looking back, I don't regret my decision to leave. It was a necessary step in my journey toward self-discovery. My parents may have missed me, but I learned that my worth isn't defined by their approval. I chose to break the cycle of emotional neglect and create a life filled with healthy relationships. In the end, I found my voice, and it was louder and clearer than I ever thought possible. So, to anyone who feels invisible in their own family, remember, you have the power to choose yourself. Sometimes the hardest but most rewarding decision is to walk away and build a life that truly reflects who you are. On to the next story. I was born due to an affair my mother had with my father. My family always kept it secret until one day my parents were having an argument and my dad told me out of anger. I decided to track down my biological father, and now I am unsure which direction I want to go down. I was born during a summer that felt like a whirlwind, a secret wrapped in a bow of lies and half-truths. My mother, Claire, had always been my everything, my confidant, my cheerleader, my best friend. She raised me alone, and I never questioned why my father wasn't in the picture. To me, love was defined by her unwavering support and the warmth of our small home filled with laughter and the smell of freshly baked cookies. Growing up, I often wondered about my father. I had seen my friends' fathers at school events, sharing proud moments and laughter. But Claire always deflected my questions with a gentle smile and a quick change of subject. Some people are just meant to love from afar, she would say, and I accepted that without hesitation. It wasn't until I turned 18 that the fragile facade of my family's narrative began to crack. The evening started like any other. I was sitting at the kitchen table, my laptop open to a college application, when I overheard raised voices from the living room. My heart sank. My parents rarely argued, and it was unsettling to hear the tension in their voices. Why can't you just tell her the truth? I heard my mother plead, her voice trembling. Because it's not your place to decide what's best for her, my father responded, the anger in his tone palpable. I had never heard my father's voice before. It was deep, authoritative, and surprisingly familiar. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach as I strained to listen. What truth? I whispered to myself, my curiosity piqued. Moments later, the argument escalated, and my father, in a fit of rage, shouted, "You think she deserves to know? She's nothing but a product of your mistake." Those words struck me like a thunderbolt. I felt the room spin as I processed their implications. I was a mistake? My heart raced as I stood frozen in place, grappling with the reality that my existence was rooted in an affair. The argument subsided, and I could hear my mother sobbing softly. I crept back to my room, my mind racing. I had to know the truth. The next few days were a blur. I felt like a ghost in my own life, moving through the motions but completely detached. I confronted my mother, who finally sat me down and confessed everything. She told me about the affair with a man named David, a brief encounter that had led to my conception. My heart ached for her, for the choices she had made, and for the life I had unknowingly lived under a veil of secrecy. With my mother's blessing, I decided to track down my biological father. It felt like a quest for identity, a desperate need to understand where I came from. I spent hours researching online, piecing together fragments of information, until I finally found him. David lived in a small town a few hours away, and I felt a mix of excitement and fear as I typed out a message introducing myself. To my surprise, he responded almost immediately, his words tinged with disbelief and curiosity. We exchanged messages back and forth, and I learned that he had no idea about my existence until now. He was married with children, a life built on stability and routine, and yet here I was, a ghost from his past resurfacing to shake things up. After weeks of messaging, we finally arranged to meet at a local cafe. The morning of our meeting, I felt a whirlwind of emotions, anticipation, anxiety, and a strange sense of hope. As I walked into the cafe, I spotted him immediately. He was tall, with salt and pepper hair, and an air of warmth that put me slightly at ease. "Are you Emma?" he asked, his voice softer than I expected. "Yes," I replied, my heart pounding. We sat across from each other, and the conversation flowed surprisingly well. He told me about his life, his family, and how he had always wondered what could have been. I listened intently, absorbing every word, but there was a nagging voice in my head asking whether I truly belonged in this new narrative. As we talked, I felt a connection forming, but it was overshadowed by the reality of our circumstances. I was a secret, a hidden chapter in his life. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was intruding on something sacred, something that had been carefully constructed over the years. After our coffee, he offered to take me for a walk in a nearby park. As we strolled under the autumn leaves, I found myself torn between wanting to embrace this newfound relationship and the fear of disrupting the life he had built. "Do you want to know what I think?" he asked, glancing at me with a mix of curiosity and concern. "Sure," I replied, my heart racing. "I think you deserve to know who you are." But I also think you need to consider what this means for everyone involved, for your mother, for my family, for you. It's a lot to unpack. His words hung in the air, heavy with implication. I realized that I was at a crossroads. I could pursue a relationship with him, dive into the unknown, or I could step back and protect the life I had always known with my mother. The days that followed were filled with contemplation. I spoke with my mother about my meeting with David, and she was supportive yet cautious. "Just remember, you're my daughter," she said, her eyes glistening with tears. "No matter what happens, that will never change." I spent sleepless nights weighing my options. I could reach out to David again, explore this new connection, or I could let it go, returning to the comfort of my mother's love. Eventually, I decided to meet him one last time. I needed closure, a sense of direction. As we sat across from each other again, I took a deep breath. "I think I need some time to figure things out," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "I want to understand who I am, but I also don't want to disrupt your life or my mother's." David nodded, his expression understanding yet tinged with sadness. "I get it. Just know that I'm here if you ever need me. I want you to be happy, Emma." As I walked away from that meeting, I felt a strange sense of peace. The secret that had once consumed me had transformed into a journey of self-discovery. I still didn't know which direction I wanted to go, but for the first time, I felt empowered to choose my own path. In the end, I realized that family isn't just about blood. It's about love, understanding, and the connections we forge along the way. No matter where this journey leads me, I know I will always have a place in my mother's heart, and perhaps, in time, in my father's too. What did you think of these stories? Let me know your thoughts about them in the comments, and thanks for listening.